What's up everyone, and thank you for stopping by the channel. Today's project is this Husqvarna chainsaw, and the problem is that it won't start. Let's take a good look at it, find out what's wrong with it, and hopefully we can fix it. In this video, we try and repair this chainsaw. However, it may not be the exact repair you need to make to yours. We'll explore other options later in the video. I don't have a lot of history about this chainsaw, but from what I can tell, this saw wasn't used much and spent a lot of time in storage. Now, for a 2-cycle engine, long-term storage isn't very good for them, especially if they're put away with fuel in the tank. Now, when I was handling this saw, I could hear fuel sloshing around in the tank, so I want to pour it out and see if it's stale or if there's any water contamination. Well, it's a good thing this saw didn't start because it looks like someone put straight gas in the tank instead of mixed fuel. If you look at it from the side, it's quite stale as well. Now, since there was straight gas in the tank, we need to check the engine compression. You can either slowly pull on the rope and check that you can feel the engine fight back, and this one is fighting back a lot, so I think the engine's fine, but I still want to remove the spark plug and use my compression tester. Now, you can tell quite a bit about an engine's health from the spark plug, and what's great about this one is it looks fantastic. There's no carbon buildup on it, and the color is perfect. Now, the compression tester screws into the engine where the spark plug goes, and after pulling the rope a couple of times, it'll give us a reading in PSI. My gauge is a bit off, but I want to see a reading over 50 PSI, and the higher the better. So the reading is about 80 psi, which means this engine is in great shape. Now, if the engine was ran on straight gas, then the engine would have been damaged and the reading would have been a lot less. Now, the next thing I want to do is check that the engine will run if I put some mixed fuel into the spark plug hole. So it ran for a bit on the fuel that I put into the engine, which is great news. Just out of curiosity, I'm going to put some fresh mixed fuel into the tank and try starting it. Now, there isn't a primer bulb, so starting it might take several pulls. Unfortunately, it didn't start, so the next thing I need to do is remove the carburetor and inspect it for any problems. Now, this carburetor setup is kind of special because it has a metal plate that braces it, so yours may not have it. Otherwise, it should be pretty straightforward removing yours. Another reason why your chainsaw might not be starting is that there's no spark. If that was the situation, then it wouldn't have started after putting fuel into the engine and pulling the rope. Now, if this is the case, try replacing the spark plug first. If that doesn't work, then you might have a bad ignition coil. Now, the first thing I want to do is remove the top of the carburetor to look at the pumping diaphragm. Now, what I'm looking for is that these two check valve flaps are flat and parallel with the rest of the diaphragm. Now, the easiest way to do that is to look at it from the side and make sure that the flaps don't stick up or down when compared to the rest of the diaphragm. This one looks fine, so I'll reuse it. Now, after that, I want to look at the round screen for any dirt or debris. It's kind of hard to see, but there is a film of something on it, so I'll use some carb cleaner to remove it. Now, once the screen is clean, I'm going to remove the plate over the metering diaphragm so I can inspect it. Now, the diaphragm is supposed to be very soft and pliable with no wrinkles, and the best way to inspect it is to remove it from the carburetor entirely. So the diaphragm isn't in terrible shape. In fact, it's still somewhat flexible, but it's not perfect. There's also a wrinkle in it which will hamper its motion. This means that we're going to have to replace it. Now, before I reassemble the carburetor, I want to make sure that fuel will flow through the screen when depressing the rocker arm. Just put some fuel in the screen pocket and depress the rocker arm and make sure the fuel disappears in the pocket. So the fuel did disappear, which is exactly what it's supposed to do. Now, if yours doesn't, then you might have to clean the screen with more carburetor cleaner. Now, I order my diaphragms online, and all I do is compare the pictures with the one I'm replacing. Make sure that the stem in the middle is the same length as well. After that, I'll reassemble the carburetor. Now, before I reinstall the carburetor, I want to pour out the fuel in the tank and replace the fuel line. Even though the fuel line outside of the tank is still in good shape, the same can't be said for the line inside the tank. Now, to avoid this situation, I would suggest that you at least pour out the fuel in your tank before putting it up in storage. Now, the fuel line I'm going to be using is Tygon line, which is supposed to be more ethanol fuel resistant, but I would always suggest using 100% gas if you can find it. The fuel line size I'm using is 140 thousandths, which is the same as the old line. To make it easier to install, cut the line at a sharp angle. After pulling the line into the tank, cut the angle piece off so you can install the fuel filter. Then we can cut the fuel line to about the position of the fuel port on the carburetor. Now we can finally install the carburetor on the engine. Now the throttle linkage came off, but it's okay because it makes it easier to install on the carburetor. Now the choke lever never came off the carburetor, so we just have to reinstall the orange plastic piece back into place. The only suggestion that I have is to not tighten the carburetor bolts just yet, only start them. Then you can start the screws at the bottom of the plate. After that, you can tighten them all up. Now we might have to adjust the carburetor to get it to work with the new diaphragm. Now this particular carburetor needs a splined adjustment tool. You can buy these online for several dollars for a whole set. Okay, I shouldn't have turned the choke off as it was running, as all it would do is just rev up. Instead, I should have squeezed the trigger. Aside from that, it doesn't want to idle. That means I need to adjust the L screw, which is closer to the engine. I'll start by turning it about a half turn counterclockwise, then I'll see if it idles any better. In the end, I turned both screws out just a little bit so that the carburetor would deliver more fuel to the engine and not stall out. After it cools down though, I want to try starting it just to make sure it starts fine in its new settings. So my question is, do you like Husqvarna chainsaws, or is there another brand that you prefer? Personally, I don't have any problems buying this brand, but I hear Stihl chainsaws are much better. Thank you for watching. I really appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask any questions, and I hope to see you in my next video.